Tonight, Whispers in the Dark brings you one of Edgar Allan Poe's most haunting tales of madness, decay, and terror, The Fall of the House of Usher. The evening sky was heavy with clouds, pressing low upon a barren land stripped of all vitality. I rode in silence through this desolate country, where every tree was bare, and every breath of wind carried the damp odor of decay. The earth beneath my horse's hooves yielded softly, blackened by autumn's rot, and no sound of bird or beast stirred the air. It was a landscape abandoned by joy, a place where life itself seemed to have retreated, leaving only shadows and silence. At length, the road brought me to the edge of a tarn, a black and motionless lake whose stillness reflected the gloom of the sky above. And there, upon its shore, rose the House of Usher. At the very first glimpse of the mansion, a sense of insufferable gloom took hold of me. It was no ordinary unease, but a weight upon the soul as though the stones themselves exhaled despair. The building loomed high and bleak, its walls ancient and worn, clothed in moss and foul fungi. Its windows, tall, narrow, and utterly black, stared outward like vacant eyes, without a spark of life or welcome. From the roof down to the foundation ran a single dreadful fissure, a deep crack that split the house in two, like the wound of a dying creature. I could not look away from it. The fissure seemed to breathe, as if the house were alive and rotting from within. Its reflection in the tarn doubled the horror. The crack mirrored perfectly, so that the entire building seemed ready to fall apart in silence. For a fleeting moment, I felt certain the house was aware of me, that it waited for me, and that my arrival was no accident. I shivered as the last light of day drained from the sky. The silence deepened, oppressive and absolute, broken only by the hollow echo of my horse's steps as I pressed forward. The windows of the house fixed upon me, black and watchful, and in that moment I felt less a guest approaching a friend's home, and more a wanderer being drawn into a tomb. The heavy door opened with a reluctant groan, and a pale servant silently led me through dim corridors. The air inside the mansion was stagnant, tinged with the odor of dust and age. Faded tapestries hung loosely upon the walls, their colors drained, their figures barely visible. From the high ceiling, chandeliers of tarnished crystal dangled, catching only the weakest glow of sputtering candles. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, as if the house itself whispered back. At last, I entered a vast chamber, and there I saw Roderick Usher. Though once a childhood companion, he was now transformed almost beyond recognition. His frame was thin, almost skeletal. His skin bore the pallor of a corpse, yet his eyes burned with an unnatural brightness, large and feverish, seeming at once desperate and terrified. His lips trembled as he spoke, his words quick, nervous, yet oddly graceful, as though some last remnant of refinement clung to his ruin. His hair, once neat, now hung in long disordered strands, framing a face consumed by anxiety. He grasped my hand with a strength that belied his fragile body, and in that gesture I felt his despair. He welcomed me as though I were his final refuge, his last tether to a world that was slipping from him. The chamber reflected his state. Heavy draperies shut out the daylight, books lay scattered in disarray, and strange instruments of art and science stood broken and abandoned in the corners. It was as though the room itself had fallen into the same decay that afflicted its master. Usher confessed to me the nature of his malady. His senses, he said, had grown unbearably acute. Light scorched his eyes, sound pierced his ears. Even the faintest touch tormented him. He trembled at odors imperceptible to others, and every detail of the world pressed upon him like an iron weight. Yet beyond this physical suffering lay a deeper torment, a conviction that his house and his bloodline were cursed, bound together in a slow and inevitable ruin. I listened in silence, deeply unsettled. In his quivering voice and haunted gaze, I perceived not merely illness, but the slow unraveling of a mind consumed by dread. I had come to offer friendship, yet as I looked upon him in that oppressive chamber, I felt the dreadful certainty that I was not a healer, but a witness to the final collapse of both man and house. As Roderick spoke of his malady, the heavy silence of the house seemed to deepen. A faint rustle disturbed the still air, and I turned to see another presence in the chamber. It was his sister, Lady Madeline. She glided into the room like a shadow, her movements slow, her figure almost spectral against the dark background. Her appearance struck me with a chill I could not shake. She was tall, yet frail, her frame wavering as though each step cost her strength. Her face was pale beyond natural pallor, the skin stretched thin, lips bloodless, and eyes half closed, as though lost between sleep and waking. She did not speak. Instead, she passed me by with a glance that was both vacant and piercing, a look that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow, yet no consciousness of the present. Roderick lowered his gaze, visibly shaken by her presence. He whispered to me that her illness was even more mysterious than his own. She suffered from strange trances, a wasting sickness of body and spirit, a condition that left her unable to resist the weight of her family's doom. To him, her state was not merely physical, but bound to the ancient curse of the House of Usher. As she moved past, the folds of her white gown brushed the floor with a faint hiss, the sound resembling a sigh from the house itself. She paused for a moment by the doorway, her frail figure framed by the dim candlelight, then vanished into the shadows beyond, leaving behind a silence more dreadful than her presence. The encounter left me with a sense of dread I could not explain. She seemed less a living woman than a spirit bound to the decaying mansion, her existence entwined with its crumbling stones. In her face I saw both beauty and death, a haunting vision that pressed upon me with the certainty of an approaching tragedy. In the days that followed, I watched Roderick Usher sink deeper into the abyss of his own mind. His movements grew restless, his voice trembled even in casual words, and his eyes wandered as though searching for horrors only he could see. The mansion seemed to answer his madness. Floors groaned without cause, and distant echoes haunted the night. He confessed to me, in low trembling tones, that the house itself was alive. Its walls, its corridors, its stagnant lake, all, he believed, were bound to his family's fate. He claimed the stones themselves had absorbed the sorrows of his ancestors, that the mansion breathed with a slow, malignant spirit. Often, he would pause mid-sentence, head tilted as if listening to some secret whisper carried through the halls. Then he would shudder violently, pressing his hands to his ears, insisting that he heard faint sounds, the beating of a heart, the moaning of a buried soul, the sigh of his dying sister. By candlelight, he painted wild images on canvas, grotesque landscapes of collapsing towers, fiery abysses, and distorted faces. His music, once delicate, turned into discordant storms of sound. I tried to reason with him, but my words met only fevered eyes and a trembling smile. At times, his terror would break into sudden laughter, a hollow sound that echoed through the chambers like the cry of a mad spirit. Other times, silence gripped him. He would sit motionless for hours, staring at the fissure in the wall as though it grew wider with each passing moment. I began to feel that his madness was contagious, creeping into my own mind. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion, the endless gloom, the still waters of the tarn, all pressed upon me until I too felt the weight of some unseen doom. Roderick was no longer merely a sick man. He had become a vessel for the house itself, a living embodiment of its decay, its despair, its inescapable curse. It was not long before Roderick informed me, with trembling lips, that Lady Madeline had passed away. The announcement filled the house with a silence so complete it seemed to choke the air itself. I could not tell if her death was sudden or the slow fulfillment of her wasting illness, but Roderick spoke of it as an inevitable conclusion. Another thread cut in the unraveling tapestry of his family's doom. He insisted that she be entombed in a vault beneath the house before her burial. His reasoning was strange, cloaked in superstition. He feared the physicians of the village might disturb her rest, might examine her in ways that would dishonor her frail body. Against my unease, I consented to assist him. Together, by dim torchlight, we carried her coffin down into the lower vaults of the mansion. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with dampness and the odor of decay. The chamber we entered was narrow, with walls of stone, its floor uneven, its iron door secured with rusted hinges. Centuries ago, it had served as a dungeon. Now it would serve as her tomb. We placed the coffin upon the stone floor. The sound echoed sharply, as though the house itself recoiled. I could not help but notice the faint blush still lingering on her cheeks, the almost imperceptible trace of breath upon her lips. But I dismissed it as a trick of my weary mind, a desperate refusal to accept death's presence. Roderick's hands shook violently as he closed the lid. His face was pale, his eyes wide, glistening with both grief and terror. He whispered something I could not hear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a plea to the house itself. With great effort we sealed the chamber, the iron door groaning as it shut, locking Lady Madeline into eternal darkness. When we returned to the upper halls, the silence was heavier than before. The air felt poisoned, the shadows thicker. Though Roderick claimed relief, I sensed his torment had only deepened. It seemed to me we had buried not only his sister, but hope itself within those cold stones. Several nights passed after Madeline's entombment, and the house grew heavier with each hour. Storm clouds gathered above the tarn, and winds howled through the corridors, shaking the very stones. I could not sleep. My mind was restless, haunted by unease I could neither name nor dispel. Roderick, however, descended into a state of near delirium. He roamed the halls aimlessly, muttering to himself, listening intently, as though to secret voices behind the walls. His eyes, wide and feverish, avoided mine. He trembled at every sound, the echo of footsteps, the rattle of windows, the creak of timbers. One stormy evening, as thunder rolled across the skies and rain lashed against the windows, Roderick sought me out in his chamber. His voice was low but wild. He confessed that we had laid his sister in her tomb alive. He insisted he could hear her now, her faint struggles, her cries, her desperate attempts to free herself. I tried to calm him, dismissing his words as the ravings of a broken mind, yet my own heart beat furiously with dread. The storm reached its height. Lightning split the sky, and within that deafening chaos, strange sounds rose from beneath the house. At first faint, like a distant scratching, then louder, a muffled thud, the crash of metal, a shriek smothered by stone. My blood ran cold. The great doors of the chamber trembled. A slow, dragging sound approached along the corridor. Then, with a final shudder, the doors burst open, and Lady Madeline stood before us. Her white gown was torn and blood-stained, her skin marked by the struggle of her escape. Her eyes burned with unnatural fire, not of life, but of a spirit returning from the grave. She staggered forward, her voice a hollow gasp, and with a final effort, she fell upon her brother. Roderick cried out, a scream of both terror and recognition as they collapsed together in a deadly embrace. The moment Madeline fell upon her brother, the storm outside seemed to answer with a roar of fury. I stood frozen, watching as the twins collapsed together, their pale forms entwined in deathly embrace. Roderick's final scream pierced the chamber, echoing through the hollow halls, before it was silenced forever. A dreadful realization seized me. The curse of the Ushers had reached its climax. With the death of the last blood of the line, the house itself began to tremble as though it shared their fate. The walls quivered, the floor heaved beneath my feet, and a long, low moan rose from the very foundations. I fled in terror, stumbling through the corridors as the mansion shook violently. The candle flames were extinguished by blasts of wind, leaving only flashes of lightning to guide my desperate escape. Doors slammed shut behind me, ceilings cracked open, and fragments of stone rained down. The house groaned like a living thing in its final agony. Bursting through the main entrance, I rushed into the storm. From across the tarn, I turned back to witness the doom of the House of Usher. The fissure that had long split its facade now widened with terrible force, spreading from the roof to the foundation. The walls tore apart, the towers crumbled, and with a thunderous crash, the entire structure sank into the dark waters. The tarn closed over it with a violent ripple, swallowing stone and soul alike. In moments, there was nothing but the black, silent surface of the lake, reflecting the storm above. The house, the family, the curse. All gone, consumed by the abyss. Alone in the rain, I stood trembling, unable to decide whether I had witnessed a natural ruin or a supernatural judgment. Yet the silence of the waters told me the truth. The House of Usher had perished with its blood, never to rise again. You have heard the whispers, but the darkness is never silent. Return again, and let the shadows find you. Subscribe, if you dare,